So it's finally time. After about 5.5 years of doing this channel, we are now at episode 250 of Zilog and Moto. This is crazy stuff. Now, I never once thought about stopping doing these reviews, but still, knowing that I've put 250 of these in the can, it's just a really nice feeling that I've been able to get this far and be able to accomplish this much. However, just so it doesn't sound like that I'm sniffing my own farts or anything, I want to be clear. The reason why that I've been able to be so productive and continue all this work is because of all of you out there. Just this last week, the channel went over 800 subscribers. And honestly, I couldn't be more thankful to everyone out there that subscribed or even just watched a video or two. Now, this is always going to be a small channel, as 30-year-old gaming hardware and their software libraries is a pretty niche subject in 2024. But at least to me, it doesn't feel like a small channel. And it's because of all of you out there. So again, thank you. Now, with 250 being a somewhat notable achievement, you might think that I had something special planned for this video. Perhaps some real gem from these libraries, hidden or otherwise. Well, last week I warned you not to expect anything out of the ordinary, but I suppose you could maybe consider this week's game in the gem family, if you really stretch that definition. However, I should probably pause for a second, because I'm sure that there's some of you out there that don't know me and are confused as to how in the hell anyone in their right mind could call a title that really only borders on the concept of being a video game a gem. Well, hi, my name is Dave, and welcome to Zilog and Moto, the channel that reminds you that even diamonds originally start out as big, nasty lumps of coal. Anyway, I'm out to collect and review the nearly 1,280 titles released in the English language for the Sega Master System, Genesis/Mega Drive, Sega or Mega CD as the case may be, and finally the 32X. Basically, if I can plug it into a Genesis either by itself or with some sort of add-on and be able to read what's up on the screen, I'm trying to get a copy of it and review it for posterity, with both looks at that original packaging and gameplay captured from original hardware whenever possible. Today's game, if you can call it that, is Power Factory featuring cmusicfactory. Now, if you know anything about the Sega CD library, you might be aware of the Make My Video series of games. Previously on the channel, I've reviewed both the Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch and the NXS series in episodes 49 and 150 respectively. And technically, this video was originally supposed to be for the Make My Video Crisscross game, but unfortunately it hasn't been delivered in the mail yet, so we'll have to circle back on that one. Now, you might be asking why I'm choosing to review Power Factory in its place, because is it just another music-related game on the Sega CD? Well, no, actually I'm reviewing it this week because despite the name change, it is part of the Make My Video series, and it actually was originally announced right along with Crisscross in not only advertisements at the time, but both games were also originally on the release schedule for Christmas of 1992, along with Marky Mark and NXS. So what happened with Power Factory? Why does it have a different name from the rest of the games? And why was it delayed to the point where it came out over 2 years after the most recent song that's included in the game? And even though you probably already know, is it any good? Well, I'll try to tackle all of that today, but first, a look at the package. And here's my copy of Power Factory featuring cmusicfactory. This copy is in solid shape. The manual and CD are in near mint condition, most likely barely seeing use over the last 30 or so years. And even the actual oversized jewel case has held up remarkably well, with only some surface scratching and no pressure cracks or broken hinges that these are notorious for. About the only thing missing is the foam pad that would be used to keep the disc from popping out and sliding around. This copy is definitely good enough for me to keep around, but if anyone is collecting for their own set, complete copies are currently going for about $25, and they are very available on eBay, which should probably tell you something. As far as the front cover goes, rather than use artwork from the artist albums where the music originally came from, or the artist themselves in the case of Mark Wahlberg, Power Factory instead decided to forego any appearance that might make you think of cmusicfactory, and instead use original artwork for the cover.
although if you look closely, you can see David Cole and Robert Clavilla's, i.e. the CNC and CNC Music Factory, on the monitor in the upper left-hand corner. While I think that's a nice touch, the rest of this cover art is an absolute dumpster fire. The logo is terrible, hard to read, and unless you were looking very closely at the subtitle, you would have no idea that it has anything to do with CNC Music Factory, especially if you're going off of the spine, which has no mention of the artist at all. And while the concept of having a Genesis controller that's large enough to serve as an entire video mixing board is cool, I assure you, no kid was ever this excited to play this game. Power Factory, like other games in the Make My Video series, was not released in Japan and instead only appeared in the United States and Europe. And more than likely, Japan was very thankful for that, but I digress. Having said that, Europe and the UK essentially got the same cover, so not a whole lot to discuss there. However, what about the originally planned version of the game that still had the Make My Video moniker? I know it's probably grainy, but here's what we should have gotten, as this cover utilizes art from Gonna Make You Sweat, along with formatting that matches the other Make My Video releases, and even selling the game by listing the 3 songs included right there on the front. I understand they made the decision to change the name, but this is a pretty horrific downgrade, and this title needed all the help that it could get. Flipping over the back, and at first everything seems pretty normal back here. There's 3 screenshots over to the side that don't look awful, although only the middle one shows any actual gameplay. And if you were wondering where the inspiration of that drawing of Cole and Clavillas came from on the front, well, there you go. There is something mildly, and I do mean mildly, interesting here though. Take a look at the Make Your Own Music Video graphic, and now compare it to the graphic used on Marky Mark and INXS. See the difference? At first I thought they just changed the marketing due to how much later the game came out, and maybe the desire to not brand it a game anymore after the reaction to the other titles, but it turns out that Sega was the publisher to Marky Mark and INXS, and Sony ImageSoft was the publisher of Power Factory and Crisscross, hence those two getting an edited graphic that doesn't mention Sega. And all of this makes sense actually, because Marky Mark and INXS were on the Interscope and Atlantic record labels, and CNC Music Factory and Crisscross were on Sony. Of course, none of this really matters because everything was developed by Digital Pictures. Opening up the package, and just like the other titles in the series, the manual doesn't offer much as these games are relatively simple, but there is a handy resource in the middle that tells you what all of the effects do. If you didn't have the manual, you'd probably be fine as it's relatively easy to figure out what they do, but then you'd be missing this screenshot here, which actually comes from Crisscross instead of Power Factory. Oops. Okay, that's the package. Let's remix things a bit and see if maybe, just maybe, Digital Pictures was able to use the extra time to make this one a little bit better than the other games in the series. Before we get too into the game, and yes, just imagine that I'm throwing some hilariously large quotation marks around game there, we should probably discuss that almost year-long gap between Power Factory and the rest of the series. As mentioned in the intro, Power Factory was probably the worst of the 4 titles to have a delay on because it was already the oldest game content-wise, even if it had come out by Christmas of 1992 along with the other 3 titles. To be clear, each of the 3 songs included in Power Factory, Gonna Make You Sweat, Everybody Dance Now, Here We Go, Let's Rock and Roll, and Things That Make You Go, all come from CNC Music Factory's first album, which was released on December 18th, 1990, with the lead single Gonna Make You Sweat coming out a month before. Things That Make You Go was the latest of the singles to be released, but even that came out on June 23rd, 1991, still over 2 years before the release of Power Factory in September of 1993, an absolute eternity in pop music. Just for comparison's sake with the other titles, Crisscross, I Missed the Bus came out September 3rd, 1992, Marky Mark's You Gotta Believe also came out around September of 1992, and INXS's Not Enough Time was released in August of 1992, meaning that for all of those games, the most recent single included in the game was at least still in everyone's memory upon release. So what the hell happened here? How did Sony screw this up so badly, especially since the game was announced and apparently on schedule to be released with the rest of the Make My Video titles. Well, and I don't know this for certain about any of this next portion, so take it all with a grain of salt, but I think the answer lies in a lawsuit. If you're not familiar with the pop music scene in 1990, and considering that it's 2024 right now in the creation of this video, you'd be forgiven, as there's a very good chance that you weren't even born yet. Man, I really have to get on with making those funeral home arrangements. Anyway, CNC Music Factory blasted onto the scene with Gonna Make You Sweat, Everybody Dance Now, which was a huge hit. You couldn't turn on the radio or watch MTV without hearing it for a few months. If you're not familiar with the song, go take 4 minutes to look up the video and come back, because it'll make explaining what happened next much easier. Cole and Clavillis, the CNC to CNC Music Factory, were producers, and like a lot of dance hip-hop songs at the time, pieced the song together from various bits. If you just watched MTV, you'd think that the song had performances from rapper-dancer Freedom Williams and singer-dancer Zelma Davis, with Cole and Clavillis providing the backbeat and other music. However, if you listen closely to the sung pieces, you can tell that instead of a singular performance, they're actually samples of vocals that were dropped into the song where appropriate. And if you don't know what I mean by that, listen to Every Time Everybody Dance Now is sung. It's the exact same vocal take, just copied. For pop and hip-hop, that's all relatively normal. In the late 80s and early 90s, sampling had gotten to an all-time high due to advances in technology. There was just one slight problem with these specific vocal samples. They weren't actually sung by Zelma Davis, but instead by Martha Wash, a singer that had previously found chart success on her own, most notably as part of the Weather Girls with a song called It's Raining Men. Martha wasn't exactly happy with her voice being used on Gonna Make You Sweat without her being credited, and to add insult to injury, being replaced in the video by the younger and more traditionally attractive Zelma Davis. This led to Martha suing Cole, Clavillis, and Sony in December of 1991, and eventually settling in 1994. Now, you're probably saying, well, wait, that lawsuit was on the books in 1991. If Sony knew releasing Power Factory was going to be an issue, why did they do it and not go with another artist instead? Well, my best guess would be that Sony probably thought that the lawsuit would be wrapped up way before it actually was, and weren't expecting things to drag out the way that they did. Of course, none of that explains changing the title of the game or the cover, which I can only assume was done to possibly distance the game from the other three Make My Video titles due to their lukewarm at best response. Unless you were a game pro, that is, who clearly never played any of the other three titles, and yet somehow reviewed all of them together, awarding all of them an aggregate 4.9 star rating. Yes, you heard that right, 4.9 stars. I swear, the things I find out when doing research for these videos. Like, I already knew that GamePro wasn't a serious magazine. I knew that even reading it as a preteen back in the day. At best, it served to just sell video games to kids, regardless of quality. But giving the Make My Video series an almost perfect score? I really hope whoever was writing under the Scary Larry pseudonym never got another job after that, as that's almost criminal in negligence to their readers. Having said all that, I think we've probably wasted enough time on the odd background behind Power Factory. Based on that last paragraph, you can probably guess where this review is going to land, but even though I've previously already awarded both Make My Video in Excess and Make My Video Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch a grand total of 0 combined stars, I still need to be fair to Power Factory and give it a proper review, because who knows, maybe it will earn the series its first star. Of course, to quote the great scholar Wayne Campbell, "Yeah, and monkeys might fly out my butt." Anyway, let's talk about the actual setup to Power Factory, because believe it or not, all of these Make My Video games actually have a plot to set up what you're trying to do in the game. For Power Factory, you're entering the CNC Music Factory, where two workers, Dwayne and Franklin, are slaving away to create 1,000 music videos, and they need your help to get the job done so they can leave work where a limo is waiting to take everyone for a night on the town. Dwayne is played by Lamont Johnson, who you may have seen over the years in other various TV shows, as he worked somewhat regularly as a character actor until 2018. And then Franklin, in a somewhat shocking turn of events, is played by voice actor extraordinaire Phil LaMarr in one of his first roles as an adult. Now, I suppose I shouldn't be too surprised to see someone famous in one of these games, as Seth Green did make an incredibly brief appearance in the Marky Mark edition of the series, but I just wasn't expecting it. In comparison to the previous two Make My Video games that I've reviewed, Power Factory certainly has the smallest cast of characters, and thinnest plot for that matter. Lamont and Phil actually pull double duty and also play bad guys Mr. Wheelie Boss and Mr. Blackshirt Man. And no, I did not make up those names to try to be funny, that comes directly from the game's manual. I can only assume that Mr. Wheelie Boss is named due to the character being in a wheelchair, and Mr. Blackshirt Man is named due to wearing a black shirt. Although no mention is made of his bright red mohawk and odd beak-like nose that actually makes him more look like a rooster. And to add insult to injury, these two are referred to as the disc drivers, you see, because they're driving Dwayne, Franklin, and now you to create these new music videos on discs. I'll get to all the other reasons why this is a terrible game to go along with the other entries in the series, but Phil or no Phil, this is easily the worst setup of any of these games. It's just shockingly bad. Just like the other Make My Video games, you can pick one of 3 songs to try to create a remixed video of, based on requests from Dwayne and Franklin as to what should, and shouldn't, be included in the end product. However, even though you're essentially doing the exact same thing as in the other games, the setup here is very stripped down. In both Marky Mark and In Excess, you interacted with different groups of people, and they would tell you what they wanted to see in the video. Here, since all of the requests come from Dwayne and Franklin, an already boring and repetitive game becomes even more so, because even if you're successful, all that means is that you're going to see more of Dwayne and Franklin, or possibly their evil doppelgangers if you happen to fail. If you're not familiar with these games, or didn't see any of the other reviews, the goal is pretty straightforward, although getting there might be a little confusing. After you've chosen one of the 3 songs to work on, Dwayne and Franklin discuss the requirements for that particular request, and it's your job to pay attention to the instructions and hints that they provide. Some of these are pretty clear. For instance, I had them tell me that in one video, they wanted to max out the amount of shots of Zelma Davis, and then in the next, they didn't want to see any shots of Freedom's mouth, meaning that when he was rapping, it was time to show something else. Along with that, they'll tend to mention some of the 16 different graphical effects that can be applied to the videos, and if those should be included to keep things interesting. Once you're given the instructions, 3 videos will start playing, with each being attached to the A, B, and C button. One video will be the actual music video for the song, and then the other 2 will just be stock footage that might include the things requested by Dwayne or Franklin, i.e. if they request wheels in the video, you'll want to switch to one of those videos whenever a car or motorcycle is on the screen. The game here is that this is all being done in real time, so you have to react quickly to what's on the screen, flipping video feeds on the fly and sprinkling in the effects when it makes sense. Invisible to you, the game will score your edit, and depending on how well you do, you can get 4 levels of responses. If you fail, you can either do so badly that the game refuses to play your version of the video, or your video will be shown but you get told it's not up to snuff. You can also mildly succeed and get told your video is okay but you should try again, or you can get the best response available if your video scores really well. Both successes will have you entering your name in the high score list, say that 3 times fast, and then the credits will be shown and you'll have the option to play again. Just like the other games in the series, I think the idea is interesting, but the gameplay is lacking at best, and not being able to know how well you did, even if you were successful, is a bit of a bummer, because even if you really wanted to play the game multiple times to get the best results, without being able to tell what you did well and what you messed up on, it ends up making things a guessing game. I've had times where I thought that I did exactly what they wanted and failed, and then I've had times where I thought for sure I missed too many cues and still somehow passed. And not being able to know the why that you can do better is just another place that the game misses the mark. From a graphics perspective, not only is this a grainy mess due to being an early FMV game on the console, but when edits are being done, the windows that the videos are playing in are even smaller than normal, making it very difficult at times to make out exactly what's on the screens, which is kind of a problem for when you have to react quickly and select a video feed before it changes to something that you potentially don't want in the video. I'm not sure that there's ever a time in history where this type of game works, but clearly, with the low amount of resolution and colors available on the Sega CD, the technology just wasn't quite yet there to really attempt this. On the audio side of things, I must say this was a bit of a pleasant surprise. I remembered enjoying these songs back in the day when they were originally hits, but I honestly can't remember the last time that I listened to any of them, especially not all the way through. So it was nice to get reacquainted with them, at least the first few times. Power Factory, if you look at purely certifications, actually has the most gold and platinum records attached to the songs, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why Sony stuck to releasing the game even in its delayed state. But even good songs get tiring after a while, and the way the game is structured, you listen to one of the songs while you're doing the edit, and then immediately listen to it again to see what you came up with. Didn't do well enough, so you want to try again? Well, I guess you're listening to the song another 2 times. You get the idea. I'd like to say that Power Factory is better than Make My Video Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch or Make My Video in Excess. I'd like to say that having Phil Lamar, even a very young Phil, ups the quality of the video scenes. And I'd like to say that having the strongest soundtrack, consisting of Gonna Make You Sweat, Things That Make You Go and Here We Go, make this title in the series the one that most gamers would want to play. But unfortunately, even with whatever superlatives you want to try to throw at Power Factory, this is not just the same terrible idea, but it's also worse in places, due to the streamlined cast and plot. Because of that, and hopefully to the surprise of absolutely no one, I'm giving Power Factory no stars, and yes, it is yet another total bomb. Some things deserve to remain in the past, and Power Factory, just like CNC Music Factory's career, is one of those.
And that's it for Power Factory, and this explosive 250th episode of Zilog and Moto. Okay, so in reality, it was more of a dud, but they can't all be winners. And when I said I was going to review each and every one of these games, that meant even doing this same terrible game 3 times over. Thankfully, well, the 4th time might not be the charm, but when I review Crisscross in another 100 episodes or so, that will at least be the last time that I have to go back to this particular poisoned well. Can't wait to miss the bus with them, let me tell you. Next time on Zilog and Moto, it's a game that I'm very curious about. I've reviewed the first 2 games in the series so far on the Master System, both solid titles, but this game is the series' first 16-bit edition, and not only have I never played it before, I don't recall ever even seeing it before I started this collection, outside of advertisements in game magazines back in the day, that is. I honestly have no idea what to expect, but I do think it's possible that we might have a hidden gem on our hands. Fingers crossed anyway after this week's travesty. Well, that's it for Zilog and Moto episode 250. If you liked what you saw here and want to see more, please think about liking and subscribing if you're so inclined, as it will help more people see these videos. But most importantly, whatever you like to play, have fun and be excellent to each other. Later.